Life of Pi by Jan Martel. Part 1. Toronto and Pondicherry. Chapter 1. My suffering left me sad and gloomy. Academic study and the steady, mindful practice of religion slowly brought me back to life. I have kept up what some people would consider my strange religious practices. After 1 year of high school, I attended the University of Toronto and took a double-major bachelor's degree. My majors were religious studies and zoology. My fourth-year thesis for religious studies concerned certain aspects of the cosmogony theory of Isaac Luria, the great 16th-century Kabbalist from Safed. My zoology thesis was a functional analysis of the thyroid gland of the three-toed sloth. I chose the sloth because its demeanor, calm, quiet, and introspective, did something to soothe my shattered self. There are two-toed sloths, and there are three-toed sloths, the case being determined by the forepaws of the animal, since all sloths have three claws on their hind paws. I had the great luck one summer of studying the three-toed sloth in situ in the equatorial jungles of Brazil. It is a highly intriguing creature. Its only real habitat is indolence. It sleeps or rests on average 20 hours a day. Our team tested the sleep habits of 5 wild three-toed sloths by placing on their heads, in the early evening after they had fallen asleep, bright red plastic dishes filled with water. We found them still in place late the next morning, the water of the dishes swarming with insects. The sloth is at its busiest at sunset, using the word busy here in the most relaxed sense. It moves along the bough of a tree in its characteristic upside-down position at a speed of roughly 400 meters an hour. On the ground, it crawls to its next tree at a rate of 250 meters an hour, when motivated, which is 440 times slower than a motivated cheetah. Unmotivated, it covers 4 to 5 meters an hour. The three-toed sloth is not well informed about the outside world. On a scale of 2 to 10, where 2 represents unusual dullness and 10 extreme acuity, Beebe, 1926, gave the sloth's sense of taste, touch, sight, and hearing a rating of 2, and its sense of smell a rating of 3. If you come upon a sleeping three-toed sloth in the wild, 2 or 3 nudges should suffice to waken it. It will then look sleepily in every direction but yours. Why it should look about is uncertain, since the sloth sees everything in a Magoo-like blur. As for hearing, the sloth is not so much deaf as uninterested in sound. Beebe reported that firing guns next to sleeping or feeding sloths elicited little reaction, and the sloth's slightly better sense of smell should not be overestimated. They are said to be able to sniff and avoid decayed branches, but Bullock, 1968, reported that sloths fall to the ground clinging to decayed branches often. How does it survive, you might ask? Precisely by being so slow. Sleepiness and slothfulness keep it out of harm's way, away from the notice of jaguars, ocelots, harpy eagles, and anacondas. A sloth's hairs shelter an algae that is brown during the dry season and green during the wet season, so the animal blends in with the surrounding moss and foliage and looks like a nest of white ants or of squirrels, or like nothing at all but part of a tree. The three-toed sloth lives a peaceful vegetarian life in perfect harmony with its environment. A good-natured smile is forever on its lips, reported Turler, 1966. I have seen that smile with my own eyes. I am not one given to projecting human traits and emotions onto animals, but many a time during that month in Brazil, looking up at sloth in repose, I felt I was in the presence of upside-down yogis deep in meditation or hermits deep in prayer, wise beings whose intense imaginative lives were beyond the reach of my scientific probing. Sometimes I got my majors mixed up. A number of my fellow religious studies students, muddled agnostics who didn't know which way was up, who were in the thrall of reason, that fool's gold for the bright, reminded me of the three-toed sloth, and the three-toed sloth, such a beautiful example of the miracle of life, reminded me of God. I never had problems with my fellow scientists. Scientists are a friendly, atheistic, hard-working, beer-drinking lot whose minds are preoccupied with sex, chess, and baseball when they are not preoccupied with science. I was a very good student, if I say so myself. I was tops at St. Michael's College 4 years in a row. I got every possible student award from the Department of Zoology. If I got none from the Department of Religious Studies, it is simply because there are no student awards in this department. The rewards of religious study are not in mortal hands, we all know that. I would have received the Governor General's Academic Medal, the University of Toronto's highest undergraduate award, of which no small number of illustrious Canadians have been recipients, were it not for a beef-eating pink boy with a neck like a tree trunk and the temperament of unbearable good cheer. I still smart a little at the slight. When you've suffered a great deal in life, each additional pain is both unbearable and trifling. My life is like a memento mori painting from European art. There is always a grinning skull at my side to remind me of the folly of human ambition. I mock the skull. I look at it and say, "You've got the wrong fellow. You may not believe in life, but I don't believe in death. Move on." The skull snickers and moves even closer, but that doesn't surprise me. The reason death sticks so closely to life isn't biological necessity. It's envy. Life is so beautiful that death has fallen in love with it, a jealous, possessive love that grabs at what it can. But life leaps over oblivion slightly, losing only a thing or two of no importance, and gloom is but a passing shadow of a cloud. The pink boy also got the nod from the Rhodes Scholarship Committee. I love him and hope his time at Oxford was a rich experience. If Lakshmi, goddess of wealth, one day favors me bountifully, Oxford is 5th on the list of cities I would like to visit before I pass on, after Mecca, Varanasi, Jerusalem, and Paris. I have nothing to say of my working life, only that a tie is a noose, and inverted though it is, it will hang a man nonetheless if he's not careful. I love Canada. I miss the heat of India, the food, the house lizards on the walls, the musicals on the silver screen, the cows wandering the streets, the crows cawing, even the talk of cricket matches. But I love Canada. It is a great country much too cold for good sense, inhabited by compassionate, intelligent people with bad hairdos. Anyway, I have nothing to go home to in Pondicherry. Richard Parker has stayed with me. I've never forgotten him. Dare I say I miss him? I do. I miss him. I still see him in my dreams. They are nightmares mostly, but nightmares tinged with love. Such is the strangeness of the human heart. I still cannot understand how he could abandon me so unceremoniously, without any sort of goodbye, without looking back even once. That pain is like an axe that chops at my heart. The doctors and nurses at the hospital in Mexico were incredibly kind to me, and the patients too. Victims of cancer or car accidents, once they heard my story, they hobbled and wheeled over to me. They and their families, though none of them spoke English and I spoke no Spanish. They smiled at me, shook my hand, patted me on the head, left gifts of food and clothing on my bed. They moved me to uncontrollable fits of laughing and crying. Within a couple of days I could stand, even make 2-3 steps, despite nausea, dizziness, and general weakness. Blood tests revealed that I was anemic, and that my level of sodium was very high and my potassium very low. My body retained fluids and my legs swelled up tremendously. I looked as if I had been grafted with a pair of elephant legs. My urine was a deep, dark yellow going on to brown. After a week or so, I could walk just about normally, and I could wear shoes if I didn't lace them up. My skin healed, though I still have scars on my shoulders and back. The first time I turned a tap on, its noisy, wasteful, superabundant gush was such a shock that I became incoherent and my legs collapsed beneath me, and I fainted in the arms of the nurse. The first time I went to an Indian restaurant in Canada, I used my fingers. The waiter looked at me critically and said, "Fresh off the boat, are you?" I blanched. My fingers, which a second before had the taste buds savoring the food a little ahead of my mouth, became dirty under his gaze. They froze like criminals caught in the act. I didn't dare lick them. I wiped them guiltily on my napkin. He had no idea how deeply those words wounded me. They were like nails being driven into my flesh. I picked up the knife and fork. I had hardly ever used such instruments. My hands trembled. My sambar lost its taste. Chapter 2. He lives in Scarborough. He's a small, slim man, no more than 5'5". Dark hair, dark eyes. Hair graying at the temples. Can't be older than 40. Pleasing, coffee-colored complexion. Mild fall weather, yet puts on a big winter parka with fur-lined hood for a walk to the diner. Expressive face. Speaks quickly. Hands flitting about. No small talk. He launches forth. Chapter 3. I was named after a swimming pool. Quite peculiar considering my parents never took to water. One of my father's earliest business contacts was Francis Adarabasami. He became a good friend of the family. I called him Amaji, Mama being the Tamil word for uncle and G being a suffix used in India to indicate respect and affection. When he was a young man, long before I was born, Mamaji was a champion competitive swimmer, the champion of all South India. He looked the part his whole life. My brother Ravi once told me that when Mamaji was born, he didn't want to give up on breathing water, and so the doctor, to save his life, had to take him by the feet and swing him above his head round and round. "It did the trick," said Ravi, wildly spinning his hand above his head. "He coughed out water and started breathing air, but it forced all his flesh and blood to his upper body. That's why his chest is so thick and his legs are so skinny." I believed him. Ravi was a merciless teaser. The first time he called Mamaji Mr. Fish to my face, I left a banana peel on his bed. Even in his 60s, when he was a little stooped and a lifetime of counter-obstetric gravity had begun to nudge his flesh downwards, Mamaji swam 30 lengths every morning at the pool in the Aurobindo ashram. He tried to teach my parents to swim, but he never got them to go beyond wading up to their knees at the beach and making ludicrous round motions with their arms, which, if they were practicing the breaststroke, made them look as if they were walking through a jungle, spreading the tall grass ahead of them, or, if it was the front crawl, as if they were running down a hill and flailing their arms so as not to fall. Ravi was just as enthusiastic. Mamaji had to wait until I came into the picture to find a willing disciple. The day I came of swimming age, which, to mother's distress, Mamaji claimed was 7, he brought me down to the beach, spread his arms seaward, and said, "This is my gift to you." "And then he nearly drowned you," claimed mother. I remained faithful to my aquatic guru. Under his watchful eye, I lay on the beach and fluttered my legs and scratched away at the sand with my hands, turning my head at every stroke to breathe. I must have looked like a child throwing a peculiar slow-motion tantrum. In the water, as he held me at the surface, I tried my best to swim. It was much more difficult than on land, but Mamaji was patient and encouraging. When he felt that I had progressed sufficiently, we turned our backs on the laughing and the shouting, the running and the splashing, the blue-green waves and the bubbly surf, and headed for the proper rectangularity and the formal flatness, and the paying admission, of the ashram swimming pool. I went there with him 3 times a week throughout my childhood, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday early morning ritual with the clockwork regularity of a good front crawl stroke. I have vivid memories of this dignified old man stripping down to nakedness next to me, his body slowly emerging as he neatly disposed of each item of clothing, decency being salvaged at the very end by a slight turning away, and a magnificent pair of imported athletic bathing trunks. He stood straight, and he was ready. It had an epic simplicity. Swimming instruction, which in time became swimming practice, was grueling, but there was a deep pleasure of doing a stroke with increasing ease and speed over and over, till hypnosis practically, the water turning from molten lead to liquid light. It was on my own, a guilty pleasure, that I returned to the sea, beckoned by the mighty waves that crashed down and reached for me in humble tidal ripples, gentle lassos that caught their willing Indian boy. My gift to Mamaji one birthday, I must have been 13 or so, was 2 full lengths of credible butterfly. I finished so spent I could hardly wave to him. Beyond the activity of swimming, there was the talk of it. It was the talk that father loved. The more vigorously he resisted actually swimming, the more he fancied it. Swim lore was his vacation talk from the workday talk of running a zoo. Water without a hippopotamus was so much more manageable than water with one. Mamaji studied in Paris for 2 years, thanks to the colonial administration. He had the time of his life. This was in the early 1930s, when the French were still trying to make Pondicherry as Gallic as the British were trying to make the rest of India Britannic. I don't recall exactly what Mamaji studied. Something commercial, I suppose. He was a great storyteller, but forget about his studies or the Eiffel Tower or Louvre or the cafes of the Champs-Élysées. All his stories had to do with the swimming pools and swimming competitions. For example, there was the Piscine d'Eligny, the city's oldest pool, dating back to 1796, an open-air barge moored to the Quai d'Orsay and the venue for the swimming events of the 1900 Olympics. But none of the times were recognized by the International Swimming Federation because the pool was 6 meters too long. The water in the pool came straight from the Seine, unfiltered and unheated. It was cold and dirty, said Mamaji. The water, having crossed all of Paris, came in foul enough. Then people at the pool made it utterly disgusting. In conspiratorial whispers, with shocking details to back up his claim, he assured us that the French had very low standards of personal hygiene. Deligny was bad enough. Bain Royal, another latrine on the Seine, was worse. At least at Deligny they scooped out the dead fish. Nevertheless, an Olympic pool is an Olympic pool, touched by immortal glory. Though it was a cesspool, Mamaji spoke of Deligny with a fond smile. One was better off at the Piscine Chateau London, Revue or de Boulevard de la Guerre. They were indoor pools with roofs, on land and open year-round. Their water was supplied by the condensation from steam engines from nearby factories, and so was cleaner and warmer. But these pools were still a bit dingy and tended to be crowded. There was so much gob and spit floating in the water, I thought I was swimming through jellyfish, chuckled Namaji. The Piscean air bearer Ledru and Budokai were bright, modern, spacious pools, fed by artesian wells. They set the standard for excellence in municipal swimming pools. There was the Piscean de Tours, of course, the city's other great Olympic pool, inaugurated during the Second Paris Games of 1924. And there were still others, many of them. But no swimming pool in Namaji's eyes matched the glory of the Piscean Molitor. It was the crowning aquatic glory of Paris, indeed, of the entire civilized world. It was a pool the gods would have delighted to swim in. Molitor had the best competitive swimming club in Paris. There were two pools, an indoor and an outdoor. Both were as big as small oceans. The indoor pool always had 2 lanes reserved for swimmers who wanted to do lengths. The water was so clean and clear you could have used it to make your morning coffee. Wooden changing cabins, blue and white, surrounded the pool on 2 floors. You could look down and see everyone and everything. The porters who marked your cabin door with chalk to show that it was occupied were limping old men, friendly in an ill-tempered way. No amount of shouting and tomfoolery ever ruffled them. The showers gushed hot, soothing water. There was a steam room and an exercise room. The outside pool became a skating rink in winter. There was a bar, a cafeteria, a large sunning deck, even 2 small beaches with real sand. Every bit of tile, brass, and wood gleamed. It was the only pool that made Namaji fall silent, his memory making too many lengths to mention. Namaji remembered. Father dreamed. That is how I got my name when I entered this world, a last welcome addition to my family. 3 years after Ravi, Piscean Molitor Patel. Chapter 4. Our good old nation was just 7 years old as a republic when it became bigger by a small territory. Pondicherry entered the Union of India on November 1st, 1954. One civic achievement called for another. A portion of the grounds of the Pondicherry Botanical Garden was made available rent-free for an exciting business opportunity and, lo and behold, India had a brand new zoo, designed and run according to the most modern, biologically sound principles. It was a huge zoo, spread over numberless acres, big enough to require a train to explore it, though it seemed to get smaller as I grew older, train included. Now it's so small it fits in my head. You must imagine a hot and humid place, bathed in sunshine and bright colors. The riot of flowers is incessant. There are trees, shrubs, and climbing plants in profusion, peepals, gloomhors, flames of the forest, red silk cottons, jacarandas, mangoes, jackfruits, and many others that would remain unknown to you if they didn't have neat labels at their feet. There are benches. On these benches you see men sleeping, stretched out, or couples sitting, young couples, who steal glances at each other shyly and whose hands flutter in the air, happening to touch. Suddenly, amidst the tall and slim trees up ahead, you notice 2 giraffes quietly observing you. The sight is not the last of your surprises. The next moment you are startled by a furious outburst coming from a great troop of monkeys, only outdone in volume by the shrill cries of strange birds. You come to a turnstile. You distractedly pay a small sum of money. You move on. You see a low wall. What can you expect beyond a low wall? Certainly not a shallow pit with 2 mighty Indian rhinoceros. But that is what you will find. And when you turn your head, you see the elephant that was there all along, so big you didn't notice it. And in the pond you realize those are hippopotamuses floating in the water. The more you look, the more you see. You are in Zoo Town. Before moving to Pondicherry, Father ran a large hotel in Madras. An abiding interest in animals led him to the zoo business. A natural transition, you might think, from hotel keeping to zookeeping. Not so. In many ways, running a zoo is a hotel keeper's worst nightmare. Consider. The guests never leave their rooms. They expect not only lodging, but full board. They receive a constant flow of visitors, some of whom are noisy and unruly. One has to wait until they saunter to their balconies, so to speak, before one can clean their rooms. And then one has to wait until they tire of the view and return to their rooms before one can clean their balconies. And there is much cleaning to do, for the guests are as unhygienic as alcoholics. Each guest is very particular about his or her diet, constantly complains about the slowness of the service, and never ever tips. To speak frankly, many are sexual deviants, either terribly repressed and subject to explosions of frenzied lasciviousness, or openly depraved, in either case, regularly affronting management with gross outrages of free sex and incest. Are these the sorts of guests you would want welcome to your inn? The Pondicherry Zoo was the source of some pleasure and many headaches for Mr. Santosh Patel, founder, owner, director, head of staff at 53, and my father. To me it was paradise on earth. I have nothing but the fondest memories of growing up in a zoo. I lived the life of a prince. What Maharaja's son had such vast, luxuriant grounds to play about? What palace had such a menagerie? My alarm clock during my childhood was a pride of lions. They were no Swiss clocks, but the lions could be counted upon to roar their heads off between 5:30 and 6 every morning. Breakfast was punctuated by the shrieks and cries of howler monkeys, hill mynahs, and Moluccan cockatoos. I left for school under the benevolent gaze not only of mother, but also of brown-eyed otters and burly American bison and stretching and yawning orangutans. I looked up as I ran under some trees, otherwise peafowl might excrete on me. Better to go by the trees that sheltered the large colonies of fruit bats. The only assault there at that early hour was the vast discordant concerts of squeaking and chattering. On my way out I might stop by the terraria to look at some shiny frogs glazed bright, bright green, or yellow and deep blue, or brown and pale green. Or it might be birds that caught my attention, pink flamingos, or black swans, or one-wattled cassowaries, or something smaller, silver diamond doves, caped glossy starlings, peach-faced lovebirds, nande conures, orange-fronted parakeets. Not likely that the elephants, the seals, the big cats, or the bears would be up and doing, but the baboons, the macaques, the mangabes, the gibbons, the deer, the tapirs, the llamas, the giraffes, the mongooses were early risers. Every morning before I was out the main gate, I had one last impression that was both ordinary and unforgettable. A pyramid of turtles, the iridescent snout of the mandrill, the stately silence of a giraffe, the obese, yellow open mouth of a hippo, the beak and claw climbing of a macaw parrot up a wired fence, the greeting claps of a shoebill's bill, the senile, lecherous expression of a camel. And all these riches were had quickly as I hurried to school. It was after school that I discovered in a leisurely way what it's like to have an elephant search your clothes in the friendly hope of finding a hidden nut, or an orangutan pick through your hair for tick snacks. Its wheeze of disappointment at what an empty pantry your head is. I wish I could convey the perfection of a seal slipping in the water, or a spider monkey swinging from point to point, or a lion merely turning its head. But language founders in such seas. Better to picture it in your head if you want to feel it. In zoos, as is nature, the best times to visit are sunrise and sunset. That is when most animals come to life. They stir and leave their shelter and tiptoe to the water's edge. They show their raiments. They sing their songs. They turn to each other and perform their rites. The reward for the watching eye and the listening ear is great. I spent more hours than I can count a quiet witness to the highly mannered, manifold expressions of life that grace our planet. It is something so bright, loud, weird, and delicate as to stupefy the senses. I have heard nearly as much nonsense about zoos as I have about God and religion. Well-meaning but misinformed people think animals in the wild are happy because they are free. These people usually have a large, handsome predator in mind, a lion or a cheetah. The life of a gnu or an aardvark is rarely exalted. They imagine this wild animal roaming about the savannah on digestive walks after eating a prey that accepted its lot piously, or going for calisthenic runs to stay slim after overindulging. They imagine this animal overseeing its offspring proudly and tenderly, the whole family watching the setting of the sun from the limbs of trees with sighs of pleasure. The life of a wild animal is simple, noble, and meaningful, they imagine. Then it is captured by wicked men and thrown into tiny jails. Its happiness is dashed. It yearns mightily for freedom, and does all it can to escape. Being denied its freedom for too long, an animal becomes a shadow of itself, its spirit broken. So people imagine. This is not the way it is. Animals in the wild lead lives of compulsion and necessity within an unforgiving social hierarchy in an environment where the supply of fear is high and the supply of food low, and where territory must constantly be defended and parasites forever endured. What is the meaning of freedom in such a context? Animals in the wild are, in practice, free neither in space nor in time, nor in their personal relations. In theory, that is, as a simple physical possibility, an animal could pick up and go, flaunting all the social conventions and boundaries proper to its species. But such an event is less likely to happen than for a member of our own species, say a shopkeeper with all the usual ties, to family, to friends, to society, to drop everything and walk away from his life with only the spare change in his pockets and the clothes on his frame. If a man, boldest and most intelligent of creatures, won't wander from place to place, a stranger to all, beholden to none, why would an animal, which is by temperament far more conservative? For that is what animals are, conservative, One might even say reactionary. The smallest changes can upset them. They want things to be just so, day after day, month after month. Surprises are highly disagreeable to them. You see this in their spatial relations. An animal inhabits its space, whether in a zoo or in the wild, in the same way chess pieces move about a chessboard, significantly. There is no more happenstance, no more freedom, involved in the whereabouts of a lizard or a bear or a deer than in the location of a knight on a chessboard. Both speak of pattern and purpose. In the wild, animals stick to the same paths for the same pressing reasons, season after season. In a zoo, if an animal is not in its normal place in its regular posture at the usual hour, it means something. It may be the reflection of nothing more than a minor change in the environment. A coiled hose left out by a keeper has made a menacing impression. A puddle had formed that bothers the animal. A ladder is making a shadow. But it could mean something more. At its worst, it could be that most dreaded thing to a zoo director, a symptom, a herald of trouble to come, a reason to inspect the dung, to cross-examine the keeper, to summon the vet. All this because the stork is not standing where it usually stands. But let me pursue for a moment only one aspect of the question. If you went to a home, kicked down the front door, chased the people who lived there out into the street and said, "Go, you are free, free as a bird, go, go," do you think they would shout and dance for joy? They wouldn't. Birds are not free. The people you've just evicted would sputter, "With what right do you throw us out? This is our home, we own it, we have lived here for years. We're calling the police, you scoundrel!" Don't we say there's no place like home? That's certainly what animals feel. Animals are territorial. That is the key to their minds. Only a familiar territory will allow them to fulfill the two relentless imperatives of the wild, the avoidance of enemies and the getting of food and water. A biologically sound zoo enclosure, whether cage, pit, moated island, corral, terrarium, aviary, or aquarium, is just another territory, peculiar only in its size and in its proximity to human territory. That it is so much smaller than what it would be in nature stands to reason. Territories in the wild are large, not as a matter of taste, but of necessity. In a zoo we do for animals what we have done for ourselves with houses. We bring together in a small space what in the wild is spread out. Whereas before for us a cave was here, the river over there, the hunting grounds a mile that way, the lookout next to it, the berries somewhere else, all of them infested with lions, snakes, ants, leeches, and poison ivy. Now the river flows through taps at hand's reach, so we can wash next to where we sleep. We can eat where we have cooked, and we can surround the whole with a protective wall and keep it clean and warm. A house is a compressed territory where our basic needs can be fulfilled close by and safely. A sound zoo enclosure is the equivalent for an animal, with the noteworthy absence of a fireplace or the like present in every human habitation. Finding within it all the places it needs, a lookout, a place for nesting, for eating and drinking, for bathing, for grooming, etc., and finding that there is no need to go hunting, food appearing 6 days a week, an animal will take possession of its zoo space in the same way it would lay claim to its new space in the wild, exploring it and marking it out in the normal ways of its species, with sprays of urine perhaps. Once this moving in ritual is done, and the animal has settled, it will not feel like a nervous tenant, and even less like a prisoner, but rather like a landholder, and it will behave in the same way within its enclosure as it would in its territory in the wild, including defending it tooth and nail should it be invaded. Such an enclosure is subjectively neither better nor worse for an animal than its condition in the wild, so long as it fulfills the animal's needs. A territory, natural constructed, simply is, without judgment, a given, like the spots on a leopard. One might even argue that if an animal could choose with intelligence, it would opt for living in a zoo, since the major difference between a zoo and the wild is the absence of parasites and enemies and the abundance of food in the first, and their respective abundance and scarcity in the second. Think about it yourself. Would you rather be put up at the Ritz with free room service and unlimited access to a doctor, or be homeless without a soul to care for you? But animals are incapable of such discernment. Within the limits of their nature, they make do with what they have. A good zoo is a place of carefully worked out coincidence. Exactly where an animal says to us, "Stay out," with its urine and other secretion, we say to it, "Stay in," with our barriers. Under such conditions of diplomatic peace, all animals are content and we can relax and have a good look at each other. In the literature can be found legions of examples of animals that could escape but did not, or did and returned. There is the case of the chimpanzee whose cage door was left unlocked and had swung open. Increasingly anxious, the chimp began to shriek and to slam the door shut repeatedly, with a deafening clang each time, until the keeper, notified by a visitor, hurried over to remedy the situation. A herd of roe deer in a European zoo stepped out of their corral when the gate was left open. Frightened by visitors, the deer bolted for the nearby forest, which had its own herd of wild roe deer, and could support more. Nonetheless, the zoo roe deer quickly returned to their corral. In another zoo, a worker was walking to his work site at an early hour, carrying planks of wood, when, to his horror, a bear emerged from the morning mist, heading straight for him at a confident pace. The man dropped the planks and ran for his life. The zoo staff immediately started searching for the escaped bear. They found it back in its enclosure, having climbed down into its pit the way it had climbed out, by the way of a tree that had fallen over. It was thought that the noise of the planks of wood falling to the ground had frightened it. But I don't insist. I don't mean to defend zoos. Close them all down if you want, and let us hope that what wildlife remains can survive in what's left in the natural world. I know zoos are no longer in people's good graces. Religion faces the same problem. Certain illusions about freedom plague them both. The Pondicherry Zoo doesn't exist anymore. Its pits are filled in, the cages tore down. I explore it now in the only place left for it, my memory. Chapter 5. My name isn't the end of the story about my name. When your name is Bob, no one asks you, how do you spell that? Not so with Piscine Molitor Patel. Some thought it was P. Singh, and that I was a Sikh, and they wondered why I wasn't wearing a turban. In my university days, I visited Montreal once with some friends. It fell to me to order pizzas one night. I couldn't bear to have yet another French speaker guffawing at my name, so when the man on the phone asked, "Can I have your name?" I said, "I am who I am." Half an hour later, 2 pizzas arrived for Ian Houlihan. It is true that those we meet can change us, sometimes so profoundly that we are not the same afterwards, even unto our names. Witness Simon, who is called Peter, Matthew, also known as Levi, Nathaniel, who is known as Bartholomew, Judas, not Iscariot, who took the name Thaddeus, Simeon, who went by Niger, Saul, who became Paul. My Roman soldier stood in the schoolyard one morning when I was 12. I had just arrived. He saw me, and a flash of evil genius lit up his dull mind. He raised his arm, pointed at me, and shouted, "It's Pissing Patel!" In a second, everyone was laughing. It fell away as we filed into the class. I walked in last, wearing my crown of thorns. The cruelty of children comes as news to no one. The words would waft across the yard to my ears, unprovoked, uncalled for. "Where's Pissing? I've got to go." Or, "You're facing the wall, are you Pissing?" Or something of the sort. I would freeze, or, the contrary, pursue my activity, pretending not to have heard. The sound would disappear, but the hurt would linger, like the smell of piss long after it is evaporated. Teachers started doing it too. It was the heat. As the day wore on, the geography lesson, which in the morning had been as compact as an oasis, started to stretch out like the Thar Desert. The history lesson, so alive when the day was young, became parched and dusty. The mathematics lesson, so precise at first, became muddled. In their afternoon fatigue, as they wiped their foreheads and the backs of their necks with their handkerchiefs, without meaning to offend or to get a laugh, even teachers forgot the fresh aquatic promise of my name and distorted it in a shameful way. By nearly imperceptible modulations I could hear the change. It was as if their tongues were charioteers driving wild horses. They could manage well enough the first symbol, the P, but eventually the heat was too much and they lost control of their frothy-mouthed steeds, and could no longer rein them in for the climb of the second syllable, the scene. Instead, they plunged hellbent into sing. The next time round, all was lost. My hand would be up to give an answer, and I would be acknowledged with, "Yes, Pissing." Often, the teacher wouldn't realize what he just called me. He would look at me warily after a moment, wondering why I wasn't coming out with the answer, and sometimes the class, as beaten down by the heat as it was, wouldn't react either, not a snicker or a smile, but I always heard the slur. I spent my last year at St. Joseph's School feeling like the persecuted prophet Muhammad in Mecca, peace be upon him. But just as he planned his flight to Medina, the Hijra that would mark the beginning of Muslim time, I planned my escape and the beginning of the new time for me. After St. Joseph's, I went to Petit Seminaire, the best private English medium secondary school in Pondicherry. Ravi was already there, and like all younger brothers, I would suffer from following in the footsteps of a popular older sibling. He was the athlete of his generation at Petit Seminaire, a fearsome bowler and a powerful batter, the captain of the town's best cricket team, our very own Kapil Dev. There I was a swimmer, made no waves. It seems to be a law of human nature that those who live by the sea are suspicious of swimmers, just as those who live in the mountains are suspicious of mountain climbers. But following in someone's shadow wasn't my escape. Though I would have taken any name over pissing, even Ravi's brother, I had a better plan than that. I put it to execution on the very first day of school, in the very first class. Around me were other alumni of St. Joseph's. The class started, the way all new classes start, with the stating of names. We called them out from our desks in order in which we happened to be sitting. Ganapathy Kumar, said Ganapathy Kumar. Vipin Nath, said Vipin Nath. Shamshul Huda, said Shamshul Huda. Peter Damaraj, said Peter Damaraj. Each name elicited a tick on a list and a brief mnemonic stare from the teacher. I was terribly nervous. Ajith Gatsan, said Ajith Gatsan 4 decks away. Sampath Saroja, said Sampath Saroja 3 away. Stanley Kumar, said Stanley Kumar 2 away. Sylvester Naveen, said Sylvester Naveen, right in front of me. It was my turn. Time to put down Satan. Medina, here I come. I got up from my desk and hurried to the blackboard. Before the teacher could say a word, I picked up a piece of chalk and said as I wrote, My name is Pisin Molitor Patel, known to all as... I double underlined the first 2 letters of my given name. For good measure I added, pi equals 3.14. And I drew a large circle, which I then sliced in 2 with a diameter, to evoke that basic lesson of geometry. There was silence. The teacher was staring at the board. I was holding my breath. Then he said, Very well, Pi. Sit down. Next time you will ask permission before leaving your desk. Yes, sir. He ticked my name off and looked at the next boy. Mansoor Ahmad, said Mansoor Ahmad. I was saved. Gautam Selvaraj, said Gautam Selvaraj. I could breathe. Arun Anaji, said Arun Anaji. A new beginning. I repeated the stunt with every teacher. Repetition is important in the training not only of animals, but also of humans. Between one commonly named boy and the next, I rushed forward and emblazoned, sometimes with a terrible screech, the details of my rebirth. It got to be that after a few times the boys sang along with me, a crescendo that climaxed, after a quick intake of air while I underlined the proper note, with such a rousing rendition of my new name that it would have been a delight of any choir master. A few boys followed up with a whispered urgent 3.4, 3.14, as I wrote as fast as I could, and I ended the concert by slicing the circle with such vigor that bits of chalk went flying. When I put my hand up that day, which I did every chance I had, teachers granted me the right to speak with a single syllable that was music to my ears. Students followed suit, even the St. Joseph's Devils. In fact, the name caught on. Truly, we are a nation of aspiring engineers. Shortly after, there was a boy named Amprakash, who was calling himself Omega, and another who was passing himself off as an Upsilon. And for a while there was a Gamma, a Lambda, and a Delta. But I was the first and most enduring of the Greek and Petit Seminaire. Even my brother, the captain of the cricket team, that local god, approved. He took me aside the next week. What's this here about a nickname you have? He said. I kept silent. Because whatever mocking was to come, it was to come. There was no avoiding it. I didn't realize you liked the color yellow so much. The color yellow? I looked around. No one must hear what he was about to say, especially not one of his lackeys. Ravi, what do you mean? I whispered. It's all right with me, brother. Anything better than pissing, even lemon pie. As he sauntered away and smiled, he said, You look a bit red in the face. But he held his peace. And so, in that Greek letter that looks like a shack with a corrugated tin roof, and that elusive, irrational number with which scientists try to understand the universe, I found refuge. Chapter 6. He's an excellent cook. His overheated house is always smelling of something delicious. His spice rack looks like an apothecary's shop. When he opens his refrigerator or his cupboards, there are many brand names I don't recognize. In fact, I can't even tell what language they're in. We are in India, but he handles Western dishes equally well. He makes me the most zesty yet subtle macaroni and cheese I've ever had. And his vegetarian tacos would be the envy of all of Mexico. I noticed something else. His cupboards are jam-packed. Behind every door, on every shelf, stand mountains of neatly stacked cans and packages, a reserve of food to last the siege of Leningrad. Chapter 7. It was my luck to have a few good teachers in my youth, men and women who came into my dark head and lit a match. One of these was Mr. Satosh Kumar, my biology teacher at Petit Seminaire, and an active communist who was always hoping Tamil Nadu would stop electing movie stars and go the way of Kerala. He had a most peculiar appearance. The top of his head was bald and pointy, yet he had the most impressive jowls I've ever seen, and his narrow shoulders gave way to a massive stomach that looked like the base of a mountain, except that the mountain stood in thin air, for it stopped abruptly and disappeared horizontally into his pants. It's a mystery to me how his stick-like legs supported the weight above him, but they did, though they moved in surprising ways at times, as if his knees could bend in any direction. His construction was geometric. He looked like two triangles, a small one and a larger one, balanced on two parallel lines, but organic, quite warty actually, and with sprigs of black hair sticking out of his ears, and friendly. His smile seemed to take up the whole base of the triangular head. Mr. Kumar was the first avowed atheist I ever met. I discovered this not in the classroom, but at the zoo. He was a regular visitor who read the labels and descriptive notices in their entirety and approved of every animal he saw. Each to him was the triumph of logic and mechanics, and nature as a whole was an exceptionally fine illustration of science. To his ears, when an animal felt the urge to mate, it said Gregor Mendel, or calling the father of genetics, and when it was time to show its mettle, Charles Darwin, the father of natural selection. And what we took to the bleating, grunting, hissing, snorting, roaring, growling, howling, chirping, and screeching were but the thick accents of foreigners. When Mr. Kumar visited the zoo, it was to take the pulse of the universe, and his stethoscopic mind always confirmed to him that everything was in order, that everything was order. He left the zoo feeling scientifically refreshed. The first time I saw his triangular form teetering and tottering about the zoo, I was shy to approach him. As much as I liked him as a teacher, he was a figure of authority, and I a subject. I was a little afraid of him. I observed him at a distance. He had just come to the rhinoceros pit. The two Indian rhinos were great attractions at the zoo because of the goats. Rhinos are social animals, and when we got Peek, a young wild male, he was showing signs of suffering from isolation, and he was eating less and less. As a stopgap measure, while he searched for a female, Father thought of seeing if Peek couldn't be accustomed to living with goats. If it worked, it would save a valuable animal. If it didn't, it would only cost a few goats. It worked marvelously. Peek and the herd of goats became inseparable, even when someone arrived. Now, when the rhinos bathed, the goats stood around the muddy pool, and when the goats ate in their corner, Peek and Summit stood next to them like guards. The living arrangement was very popular with the public. Mr. Kumar looked up and saw me. He smiled, and, one hand holding onto the railing, the other waving, signaled me to come over. "Hello, Pi," he said. "Hello, sir. It's good of you to come to the zoo." "I come here all the time. One might say it's my temple. This is interesting." He was indicating the pit. "If we had politicians like these goats and rhinos, we'd have fewer problems in our country. Unfortunately, we have a prime minister who has the armor plating of a rhinoceros without any of his good sense." I didn't know much about politics. Father and Mother complained regularly about Mrs. Gandhi, but it meant little to me. She lived far away in the north, not at the zoo and not in Pondicherry. But I felt I had to say something. "Religion will save us," I said. Since when I could remember, religion had been very close to my heart. "Religion?" Mr. Kumar grinned broadly. "I don't believe in religion. Religion is darkness." Darkness? I was puzzled. I thought, darkness is the last thing that religion is. Religion is light. Was he testing me? Was he saying, religion is darkness, the way he sometimes said in class things like mammals lay eggs, to see if someone would correct him? "Only platypuses, sir." There are no grounds for going beyond the scientific explanation of reality, and no sound reason for believing anything but our sense experience. A clear intellect, close attention to detail, and a little scientific knowledge will expose religion as superstitious bosh. God does not exist. Did he say that? Or am I remembering the lines of later atheists? At any rate, it was something of the sort. I had never heard such words. Why tolerate darkness? Everything is here and clear, if only we look carefully. He was pointing at Peek. Now, though, I had great admiration for Peek. I had never thought of a rhinoceros as a light bulb. He spoke again. Some people say God died during the partition in 1947. He may have died in 1971 during the war. Or he may have died yesterday, in Pondicherry, in an orphanage. That's what some people say, Pi. When I was your age, I lived in a bed, racked with polio. I asked myself every day, where is God? Where is God? Where is God? God never came. It wasn't God who saved me. It was medicine. Reason is my prophet, and it tells me that as a watch stops, so we die. It's the end. If the watch doesn't work properly, it must be fixed here and now by us. One day we will take hold of the means of production, and there will be justice on earth. This was all a bit much for me. The tone was right, loving and brave, but the details seemed bleak. I said nothing. It wasn't for fear of angering Mr. Kumar. I was more afraid that in a few words thrown out he might destroy something that I loved. What if his words had the effect of polio on me? What a terrible disease that must be if it could kill God in a man. He walked off, pitching and rolling in the wild sea that was the steady ground. Don't forget the test on Tuesday. Study hard, 3.14. Yes, Mr. Kumar. He became my favorite teacher at Petit Seminaire, and the reason I studied zoology at the University of Toronto. I felt a kinship with him. It was my first clue that atheists are my brothers and sisters of a different faith, and every word they speak speaks of faith. Like me, they go as far as the legs of reason will carry them, and then they leap. I'll be honest about it. It is not atheists who get stuck in my craw, but agnostics. Doubt is useful for a while, but we must all pass through the Garden of Gethsemane. If Christ played with doubt, so must we. If Christ spent an anguished night in prayer, if he must burst out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then surely we are also permitted to doubt. But we must move on. To choose doubt as a philosophy of life is akin to choosing immobility as a means of transportation. Chapter 8. We commonly say in the trade that the most dangerous animal in the zoo is man. In a general way, we mean how our species' excessive predatoriness has made the entire planet our prey. More specifically, we have in mind the people who feed fish hooks to the otters, razors to the bears, apples with small nails in them to the elephants, and hardware variations on the theme. Ballpoint pens, paper clips, safety pins, rubber bands, combs, coffee spoons, horseshoes, pieces of broken glass, rings, brooches, and other jewelry, and not just cheap plastic bangles, gold wedding bands too. Drinking straws, plastic cutlery, ping-pong balls, tennis balls, and so on. The obituary of zoo animals that have died from being fed foreign bodies would include gorillas, bison, storks, rheas, ostriches, seals, sea lions, big cats, bears, camels, elephants, monkeys, and most every variety of deer, ruminant, and songbird. Among zookeepers, Goliath's death is famous. He was a bull elephant seal, a great big venerable beast of 2 tons, star of his European zoo, loved by all visitors. He died of internal bleeding after someone fed him a broken beer bottle. The cruelty is often more active and direct. The literature contains reports on the many torments inflicted upon zoo animals. A shoebill dying of shock after having its beak smashed with a hammer. A moose stag losing its beard, along with a strip of flesh the size of an index finger, to a visitor's knife. This same moose was poisoned 6 months later. A monkey's arm broken after reaching out for proffered nuts. A deer's antlers attacked with a hacksaw. A zebra stabbed with a sword. Another assault on other animals, with walking sticks, umbrellas, hairpins, knitting needles, scissors, and whatnot. Often with an aim at taking an eye out or injuring sexual parts. Animals are also poisoned. And there are indecencies even more bizarre. Onanists breaking a sweat on monkeys, ponies, birds, a religious freak who cut a snake's head off, a deranged man who took to urinating in an elk's mouth. At Pondicherry, we were relatively fortunate. We were spared the sadists who plied European and American zoos. Nonetheless, our golden agouti vanished, stolen by someone who ate it. Father suspected. Various birds, pheasants, peacocks, macaws, lost feathers to feel greedy for their beauty. We caught a man with a knife climbing into a pen for mouse deer. He said he was going to punish evil Ravana, who the Ramayana took the form of a deer when he kidnapped Sita, Rama's consort. Another man was nabbed in the process of stealing a cobra. He was a snake charmer, whose own snake had died. Both were saved, the cobra from a life of servitude and bad music, and the man from a possible death bite. We had to deal on occasion with stone throwers, who found the animals too placid and wanted a reaction. And we had a lady whose sari was caught by a lion. She spun like a yo-yo, choosing mortal embarrassment over mortal end. The thing was, it wasn't even an accident. She had leaned over, thrust her hand in the cage, and waved the end of the sari in the lion's face. With what intent we never figured out. She was not injured. There were many fascinated men who came to her assistance. Her flustered explanation to father was, "Who ever heard of a lion eating a cotton sari? I thought lions were carnivores." Our worst troublemakers were the visitors who gave food to the animals. Despite our vigilance, Dr. Attal, the zoo veterinarian, could tell by the number of animals with digestive disturbances, which had been the busy days at the zoo. He called tidbatitis the case of enteritis or gastritis, due to many carbohydrates, especially sugar. Sometimes we wish people had stuck to sweets. People have a notion that animals can eat anything without the least consequence to their health. Not so. One of our sloth bears became seriously ill with severe hemorrhagic enteritis after being given fish that had been gone putrid by a man who was convinced he was doing a good deed. Just beyond the ticket booth, father had painted on a wall in bright red letters the question, "Do you know which is the most dangerous animal in the zoo?" An arrow pointed to a curtain. There were so many eager, curious hands that pulled the curtain that we had to replace it regularly. Behind it was a mirror. But I learned at my expense that father believed there was another animal even more dangerous than us, and one that was extremely common, too, found on every continent. In every habitat, the redoubtable species Anomalus anthropomorphicus, the animal as seen through human eyes. We've all met one, perhaps even owned one, is the animal that is cute, friendly, loving, devoted, merry, understanding. These animals lie in ambush in every toy store and children's zoo. Countless stories are told of them. They are the pendants of those vicious, bloodthirsty, depraved animals that inflame the ire of the maniacs I have just mentioned, who vent their spite on them with walking sticks and umbrellas. In both cases, we look at an animal and see a mirror. The obsession with putting ourselves at the center of everything is the bane not only of theologians, but also of zoologists. I learned a lesson that an animal is an animal, essentially and practically removed from us, twice, once with father and once with Richard Parker. It was on a Sunday morning. I was quietly playing on my own. Father called out, "Children, come here." Something was wrong. His tone of voice set off a small alarm bell in my head. I quickly reviewed my conscience. It was clear. Ravi must be in trouble again. I wondered what he had done this time. I walked into the living room. Mother was there. That was unusual. The disciplining of children, like the tending of animals, was generally left to father. Ravi walked in last, guilt written all over his criminal face. "Ravi, Pisson, I have a very important lesson for you today." "Oh, really, is that necessary?" interrupted Mother. Her face was flushed. I swallowed. If Mother, normally so unruffled, so calm, was worried, even upset, it meant we were in serious trouble. I exchanged glances with Ravi. "Yes, it is," said Father, annoyed. "It may very well save their lives." Save our lives? It was no longer a small alarm bell that was ringing in my head. There were big bells now, like the ones we heard from Sacred Heart of Jesus Church, not far from the zoo. "But Pacine? He's only 8, Mother insisted. "He's the one who worries me the most." "I'm innocent," I burst out. "It's Ravi's fault. Whatever it is, he did it." "What?" said Ravi. "I haven't done anything wrong." He gave me the evil eye. "Shush!" said Father, raising his hand. He was looking at Mother. "Gita, you've seen Pacine. He's at the age when boys run around and poke their noses everywhere." Me? A run-arounder? An everywhere nose-poker? Not so, not so. "Defend me, Mother. Defend me," I implored in my heart. But she only sighed and nodded, a signal that the terrible business could proceed. "Come with me," said Father. We set out like prisoners, off to their execution. We left the house, went through the gate, and entered the zoo. It was early, and the zoo hadn't opened yet to the public. Animal keepers and groundskeepers were going about their work. I noticed Sitaram, who oversaw the orangutans, my favorite keeper. He paused to watch us go by. We passed birds, bears, apes, monkeys, ungulates, the terrarium house, the rhinos, the elephants, the giraffes. We came to the big cats, our tigers, lions, and leopards. Babu, their keeper, was waiting for us. We went round and down the path, and he unlocked the door to the cat house, which was at the center of the moated island. We entered. It was a vast and dim cement cavern, circular in shape, warm and humid, and smelling of cat urine. All around were great big cages divided up by thick green iron bars. A yellowish light filtered down from the skylights. Through the cage exits we could see the vegetation and the surrounding island, flooded with sunlight. The cages were empty, save one, Mahisha, our Bengal tiger patriarch, a lanky, hulking beast of 550 pounds, had been detained. As soon as we stepped in, he looped up to the bars of his cage and set off a full-throated snarl, ears flat against his skull and round eyes fixed on Babu. The sound was so loud and fierce it seemed to shake the whole cat-house. My knees started quaking. I got close to Mother. She was trembling, too. Even Father seemed to pause and steady himself. Only Babu was indifferent to the outburst and to the searing stare that bored into him like a drill. He had a tested trust in iron bars. Mahisha started pacing to and fro against the limits of his cage. Father turned to us. "What animal is this?" he bellowed above Mahisha's snarling. "It's a tiger," Ravi and I answered in unison, obediently pointing out the blindingly obvious. "Are tigers dangerous?" "Yes, Father, tigers are dangerous." "Tigers are very dangerous," Father shouted. "I want you to understand that you are never, under any circumstances, to touch a tiger, to pet a tiger, to put your hands through the bars of a cage, even to get close to a cage. Is that clear, Ravi?" Ravi nodded vigorously. "Paseen?" I nodded even more vigorously. He kept his eyes on me. I nodded so hard I'm surprised my neck didn't snap and my head fall to the floor. I would like to say in my own defense that though I may have anthropomorphized the animals till they spoke fluent English, the pheasants complaining in uppity British accents of their tea being cold and the baboons planning their bank robbery getaway in the flat, menacing tones of American gangsters, the fancy was always conscious. I quite deliberately dressed the wild animals in tame costumes of my imagination, but I never deluded myself as to the real nature of my playmates. My poking nose had more sense than that. I don't know where Father got the idea that his youngest son was itching to step into a cage with a ferocious carnivore, but wherever the strange worry came from, and Father was a worrier, he was clearly determined to rid himself of it that morning. "I'm going to show you how dangerous tigers are," he continued. "I want you to remember this lesson for the rest of your lives." He turned to Babu and nodded. Babu left. Mahisha's eyes followed him. It did not move from the door he disappeared through. He returned a few seconds later, carrying a goat with its legs tied. Mother gripped me from behind. Mahisha's snarl turned into a growl deep in the throat. Babu unlocked, opened, entered, closed, and locked a cage next to the tiger's cage. Bars and a trapdoor separated the two. Immediately, Mahisha was up against the dividing bars, pawing them. To his growling, he now added explosive, arrested woofs. Babu placed the goat on the floor. Its flanks were heaving violently. Its tongue hung from its mouth, and its eyes were spinning orbs. He untied its legs. The goat got to its feet. Babu exited the cage in the same careful way he had entered it. The cage had 2 floors, one level with us, the other at the back, higher by about 3 feet. They led outside to the island. The goat scrambled to this second level. Mahisha, now unconcerned with Babu, paralleled the move in his cage in a fluid, effortless motion. He crouched and lay still, his slowly moving tail the only sign of tension. Babu stepped up to the trapdoor between the cages and started pulling it open. In anticipation of satisfaction, Mahisha fell silent. I heard 2 things at that moment. Father saying, "Never forget this lesson," as he looked on grimly, and the bleating of the goat. It must have been bleeding all along, only we couldn't hear it before. I could feel Mother's hand pressed against my pounding heart. The trapdoor resisted with sharp cries. Mahisha was beside himself. He looked as if he were about to burst through the bars. He seemed to hesitate between staying where he was, at the place where his prey was closest, but most certainly out of reach, and moving to the ground level, further away but where the trapdoor was located. He raised himself and started snarling again. The goat started to jump. It jumped to amazing heights. I had no idea a goat could jump so high, but the back of the cage was a high and smooth cement wall. With sudden ease, the trapdoor slid open. Silence fell again, except for bleating and the click-click of the goat's hooves against the floor. A streak of black and orange flowed from one cage to the next. Normally, the big cats were not given food 1 day a week, to simulate conditions in the wild. We found out later that Father had ordered that Mahisha not be fed for 3 days. I don't know if I saw blood before turning into Mother's arms, or if I daubed it on later, in my memory, with a big brush. But I heard. It was enough to scare the living vegetation daylights out of me. Mother bundled us out. We were in hysterics. She was incensed. "How could you, Santosh? They're children. They'll be scarred for the rest of their lives." Her voice was hot and tremulous. I could see she had tears in her eyes. I felt better. Gita, my bird, it's for their sake. What if Pasine had struck his hand through the bars of the cage one day to touch the pretty orange fur? Better a goat than him, no? His voice was soft, nearly a whisper. He looked contrite. He never called her my bird in front of us. We were huddled around her. He joined us. But the lesson was not over, though it was gentler after that. Father led us to the lions and leopards. Once there was a madman in Australia who had a black belt in karate. He wanted to prove himself against the lions. He lost, badly. The keepers found only half his body in the morning. Yes, Father. The Himalayan bears and the sloth bears. One strike of the claws of these cuddly creatures, and your innards will be scooped out and splattered all over the ground. Yes, Father. The hippos. With those soft, flabby mouths of theirs, they'll crush your body to a bloody pulp. On land, they can outrun you. Yes, Father. The hyenas. The strongest jaws in nature. Don't think that they're cowardly, or that they only eat carrion. They're not, and they don't. They'll start eating you while you're still alive. Yes, Father. The orangutans. As strong as 10 men, they'll break your bones as if they were twigs. I know some of them were once pets, and you played with them when they were small, but now they're grown up and wild and unpredictable. Yes, Father. The ostrich. Looks flustered and silly, doesn't it? Listen up. It's one of the most dangerous animals in the zoo. Just one kick and your back is broken, or your torso is crushed. Yes, Father. The spotted deer. So pretty, aren't they? If the male feels he has to, he'll charge you, and these short little antlers will pierce you like daggers. Yes, Father. The Arabian camel. One slobbering bite and you'll have lost a chunk of flesh. Yes, Father. The black swans. With their beaks they'll crack your skull. With their wings they'll break your arms. Yes, Father. The smaller birds. They'll cut through your fingers with their beaks as if they were butter. Yes, Father. The elephants. The most dangerous animal of all. Most keepers and visitors are killed by more visitors and keepers are killed by elephants than by any other animal in the zoo. A young elephant will most likely dismember you and trample your body parts flat. That's what happened to one poor lost soul in a European zoo who got into the elephant house through a window. An older, more patient animal would squeeze you against a wall or sit on you. Sounds funny, but think about it. Yes, Father. There are animals we haven't stuffed by. Don't think they're harmless. Life will defend itself no matter how small it is. Every animal is ferocious and dangerous. It may not kill you, but it will certainly injure you. It will scratch you and bite you, and you can look forward to a swollen, pus-filled infection, a high fever, and a 10-day stay in the hospital. Yes, Father. We came to the guinea pigs, the only other animals besides Mahisha to have been starved at Father's orders. Having been denied their precious evening meals, Father unlocked the cage. He brought out a bag of feed from his pocket and emptied it on the floor. You see these guinea pigs? Yes, Father. The creatures were trembling with weakness as they frantically nibbled their kernels of corn. Well, he leaned down and scooped one up. They're not dangerous. The other guinea pigs scattered instantly. Father laughed. He handed me the squealing guinea pig. He meant to end on a light note. The guinea pig rested in my arms tensely. It was a young one. I went to the cage and carefully lowered it to the floor. It rushed to its mother's side. The only reason these guinea pigs weren't dangerous, didn't draw blood with their teeth and claws, was that they were practically domesticated. Otherwise, to grab a wild guinea pig with your bare hands would be like taking hold of a knife by the blade. The lesson was over. Ravi and I sulked and gave Father the cold shoulder for a week. Mother ignored him too. When I went by the rhinoceros pit, I fancied the rhinos' heads were hung low with sadness over the loss of one of their dear companions. But what can you do when you love your father? Life goes on, and you don't touch tigers. Except that now, for having accused Ravi of an unspecified crime he hadn't committed, I was as good as dead. In years subsequent, when he was in the mood to terrorize me, he would whisper to me, "Just wait till we're alone. You're the next goat." Chapter 9. Getting animals used to the presence of humans is at the heart of the art and science of zookeeping. The key aim is to diminish the animal's flight distance, which is the minimum distance at which an animal wants to keep a perceived enemy. A flamingo in the wild won't mind you if you stay more than 300 yards away. Cross that limit and it becomes tense. Get even closer and you trigger a flight reaction, from which the bird will not cease until a 300-yard limit is set again, or until heart and lungs fail. Different animals have different flight distances, and they gauge them in different ways. Cats look, deers listen, bears smell. Giraffes will allow you to come within 30 yards of them if you are in a motor car, but will run if you are 150 yards away on foot. Fiddler crabs scurry when you're 10 yards away. Howler monkeys stir in their branches when you're at 20. African buffaloes react at 75. Our tools for diminishing flight distance are the knowledge we have of an animal, the food and shelter we provide, the protection we afford. When it works, the result of an emotionally stable, stress-free wild animal that not only stays put, but is healthy, lives a very long time, eats without fuss, behaves and socializes in natural ways, and, the best sign, reproduces. I won't say that our zoo compared to the zoos of San Diego or Toronto or Berlin or Singapore, but you can't keep a good zookeeper down. Father was a natural. He made up for a lack of formal training with an intuitive gift and a keen eye. He had a knack for looking at an animal and guessing what was on its mind. He was attentive to his charges, and they, in return, multiplied, some to excess. Chapter 10. Yet there will always be animals that seek to escape from zoos. Animals that are kept in unsuitable enclosures are the most obvious example. Every animal has particular habitat needs that must be met. If its enclosure is too sunny, or too wet, or too empty, if its perch is too high or too exposed, if the ground is too sandy, if there are too few branches to make nest, if the food trough is too low, if there is not enough mud to wallow in, and so many other ifs, then the animal will not be at peace. It is not so much a question of constructing an imitation of conditions in the wild as of getting the essence of these conditions. Everything in an enclosure must be just right. In other words, within the limits of the animal's capacity to adapt, a plague upon bad zoos with bad enclosures. They bring all zoos into disrepute. Wild animals that are captured when they are fully mature are another example of escape-prone animals. Often they are too set in their ways to reconstruct their subjective world and adapt to a new environment. But even animals that were bred in zoos and have never known the wild, they are perfectly adapted to their enclosures and feel no tension in the presence of humans, will have moments of excitement that push them to seek to escape. All living things contain a measure of madness that moves them in strange, sometimes inexplicable ways. This madness can be saving. It is part and parcel of the ability to adapt. Without it, no species would survive. Whatever the reason for wanting to escape, sane or insane, zoo detractors should realize that animals don't escape to somewhere, but from something. Something within their territory has frightened them. The intrusion of an enemy, the assault of a dominant animal, a startling noise, a set-off of flight reaction. The animal flees, or tries to. I was surprised to read at the Toronto Zoo, a very fine zoo, I might add, that leopards can jump 18 feet straight up. Our leopard enclosure in Pondicherry had a wall 16 feet high at the back. I surmise that Rosie and Copycat never jumped out not because of constitutional weakness, but simply because they had no reason to. Animals that escape go from the known into the unknown, and if there is one thing an animal hates above all else, it is the unknown. Escaping animals usually hide in the very first place they find that gives them a sense of security, and they are dangerous only to those who happen to get between them and their reckoned safe spot. Chapter 11. Consider the case of the female black leopard that escaped from the Zurich Zoo in the winter of 1933. She was new to the zoo and seemed to get along with the male leopard, but various paw injuries hinted at matrimonial strife. Before any decisions could be taken about what to do, she squeezed through a break in the roof bars of her cage and vanished into the night. The discovery that a wild carnivore was free in their midst created an uproar among the citizens of Zurich. Traps were set and hunting dogs were let loose. They only rid the canton of its few half-wild dogs. Not a trace of leopard was found in 10 weeks. Finally, a casual laborer came upon it under a barn 25 miles away and shot it. Remains of roe deer were found nearby. That a big, black tropical cat managed to survive for more than 2 months in a Swiss winter without being seen by anyone, let alone attacking anyone, speaks plainly to the fact that escaped zoo animals are not dangerous absconding criminals, but simply wild creatures seeking to fit in. And this case is just one among many. If you took the city of Tokyo and turned it upside down and shook it, you would be amazed at the animals that would fall out. It would pour more than cats and dogs, I tell you. Boa constrictors, Komodo dragons, crocodiles, piranhas, ostriches, wolves, lynx, wallabies, manatees, porcupines, orangutans, wild boar. That's the sort of rainfall you could expect on your umbrella. And they expected to find, in the middle of a Mexican tropical jungle, imagine. It's laughable, simply laughable. What were they thinking? Chapter 12. At times he gets agitated. It's nothing, I say very little. It's his own story that does it. Memory is an ocean and he bobs on its surface. I worry that he'll want to stop. But he wants to tell me his story. He goes on. After all these years, Richard Parker still preys on his mind. He's a sweet man. Every time I visit, he prepares a South Indian vegetarian feast. I told him I like spicy food. I don't know why I said such a stupid thing. It's a complete lie. I had a dollop of yogurt after dollop of yogurt. Nothing doing. Each time it's the same. My taste buds shrivel up and die. My skin goes beet red. My eyes well up with tears. My head feels like a house on fire. My digestive tract starts to twist and groan in agony like a boa constrictor that has swallowed a lawnmower. Chapter 13. So you see, if you fall into a lion's pit, the reason the lion will tear you to pieces is not because it's hungry, be assured. Zoo animals are amply fed. Or because it's bloodthirsty, but because you've invaded its territory. As an aside, this is why a circus trainer must always enter the lion ring first, and in full sight of the lions. In doing so, he establishes that the ring is his territory, not theirs, a notion that he reinforces by shouting, by stomping about, by snapping his whip. The lions are impressed. Their disadvantage weighs heavily on them. Notice how they come in. Mighty predators though they are, king of beasts, they crawl in with their tails low, and they keep to the edges of the ring, which is always round, so they have nowhere to hide. They are in the presence of a strongly dominant male, a super alpha male, and they must submit to his dominance rituals. So they open their jaws wide, they sit up, they jump through paper-covered hoops, they crawl through tubes, they walk backwards, they roll over. He's a queer one, they think dimly. Never seen a top lion like him, but he runs a good pride. The larder's always full, and let's be honest, mates, his antics keep us busy. Napping all the time does get a bit boring. At least we're not riding bicycles like the brown bears or catching flying plates like the chimps. Only the trainer better make sure he always remains super alpha. He will pay dearly if he unwittingly slips to beta. Much hostile and aggressive behavior among animals is the expression of social insecurity. The animal in front of you must know where it stands, whether above you or below you. Social rank is central to how it leads its life. Rank determines who it can associate with and how, where and when it can eat, where it can rest, where it can drink, and so on. Until it knows its rank for certain, the animal lives a life of unbearable anarchy. It remains nervous, jumpy, dangerous. Lucky for the circus trainer, decisions about social rank among higher animals are not always based on brute force. Heidegger 1950 says, when two creatures meet, the one that is able to intimidate its opponent is recognized as socially superior, so that a social decision does not always depend on a fight. An encounter is some circumstance may be enough. Words of a wise animal man. Mr. Heidegger was for many years a zoo director, first of the Basel Zoo, and then of the Zurich Zoo. He was a man well versed in the ways of animals. It's a question of brain over brawn. The nature of the circus trainer's ascendancy is psychological. Foreign surroundings, the trainer's erect posture, calm demeanor, steady gaze, fearless step forward, strange roar, for example the snapping of a whip or the blowing of a whistle, these are so many factors that will fill the animal's mind with doubt and fear, and make clear to it where it stands, the very thing it wants to know. Satisfied, number 2 will back down, and number 1 can turn to the audience and shout, let the show go on. And now, ladies and gentlemen, through the hoops of real fire, Chapter 14. It is interesting to note that the lion that is the most amenable to the circus trainer's tricks is the one with the lowest social standing in the pride, the omega animal. It has the most to gain from a close relationship with a super alpha trainer. It is not only a matter of extra treats. A close relationship will also mean protection from the other members of the pride. It is this compliant animal, to the public no different from the others in size and apparent ferocity, that will be the star of the show, while the trainer leaves the beta and gamma lions, more cantankerous subordinates, sitting on their colorful barrels on the edge of the ring. The same is true for other circus animals, and is also seen in zoos. Socially inferior animals are the ones that make the most strenuous, resourceful efforts to get to know their keepers. They prove to be the ones most faithful to them, most in need of the company, least likely to challenge them or be difficult. The phenomenon has been observed with big cats, bison, deer, wild sheep, monkeys, and many other animals. It is a fact commonly known in the trade.